Hi, I'm Pastor Theron. Welcome to Story Sermons, relating life's experiences to the Bible. I'd like to tell you a story. The Bible tells us in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20 that God is able to do immeasurably more than we can ask or even imagine. Another version says God is able to do more than we can think or imagine. Now that's pretty big because your imagination is unlimited. Albert Einstein is quoted as saying that imagination is everything. It is the preview to life's coming attractions. I guess I started thinking about my first church and where it might be and what it might be like about 1999. I was licensed to the gospel ministry in 1998. I had been attending church for years. I started doing a lot of supply preaching, started attending seminary in 2001, graduated in 2003. All the while I was filling in and supply preaching and talking to churches about my first church and where it might be and what it might be like, but I had no idea where it could be. I had no idea what to expect, and it just seemed to take forever. In fact, I talk about that in last week's sermon. If you will go to my page and click up on my name up here and look at last week's message and all the messages that have been posted so far, you can get caught up to speed on the stories that I've been telling. I just didn't feel like it was ever going to happen. I guess I was just impatient. But as I finished seminary, I really began thinking about it and daydreaming about it and praying about what my first church might be like and what I wanted from it, for it. And I started thinking to myself, man, wouldn't it be great if my first church was in a small town, not too far from a bigger town? Wouldn't it be nice if the church was one of those sweet little brick churches or stone-built churches that has some history and some prestige to it? I thought it would be nice to have a fellowship hall as part of it, to do gatherings and to have fellowship and meals together. I thought if the church offered a house, what we call a parsonage, if the church offered a house, maybe the house would be away from the church. I wouldn't really want it in the same parking lot where the church is associated, the house is associated with the church, and I heard stories about how people were always knocking on the door and asking for things. I thought maybe it would be nice to have the house away from the church. Within the church, I thought maybe it would be good to have a retired pastor who could be there to help me know what I was doing better and give me counsel and provide support. But I wouldn't want him to have been a former pastor, because then the congregation members are still going to go to that person. No, I wanted somebody who was maybe a retired pastor. That's a lofty thing to ask. In terms of the church, in terms of the house, I thought maybe, if the church is on the main road, maybe off the main road, and then not just off of the main road, but maybe off of that road as well. And wouldn't it be something if the house was on a dead-end road, so that my son could ride his bike and play and be safe? And wouldn't it be something if it was at the edge of the city limits, kind of where I grew up, out almost to the edge of the city limits, out in the quieter parts of the area of the town? Wouldn't it be nice if it would be a quiet area with trees and fields, where it would be a nice place to come home to and unwind, and my son could ride his bike and play? I wouldn't want the house to be too big, but I wouldn't want it to be too small. You got to have room to work. I thought maybe a carport. Didn't really want a garage that closes up. Maybe just a carport, so that I could work on the car. I could change the oil. I might do some woodworking. Wouldn't it be something if there was room for storage, maybe a little shed or room to put extra stuff? Wouldn't it be great if there was a yard that I could keep and my son to play in? We could throw the ball in the afternoons, plants and bushes and trees to trim in the fall and mow the grass and make it look nice. I had heard countless horror stories through seminary that churches that did offer a house, a parsonage, they had these really strict requirements. And I've even heard of stories where the pastor and the pastor's wife were enjoying a little time alone, and the church members showed up for an inspection, and they wanted to look over the house and make sure that there weren't piles of dirty dishes and laundry everywhere, and they would just show up unannounced to do inspections. I didn't want that. I didn't want any part of that. But I thought, wouldn't it be nice if the house could be like ours? I mean, I recognize that it's still owned by the church, but wouldn't it be nice if they treated it like ours? I thought to myself, maybe 3 bedrooms. You would want one for the pastor and his wife. You would want one for my son, and one maybe for a home office or something. And I thought, this is the way it ought to be. I think this would be good. And then I got really specific, and I said, I wouldn't want it to be white, but I wouldn't want it to be dark either. Maybe a yellow or a gray with maroon shutters. And I began putting these things into prayer. Well, in 2005, after I finished CPE, I was called to Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and followed that Hurricane Rita in Cameron Parish near Lake Charles. And I was still on orders with the National Guard when this church called me, finally, about October of 2005. And I was allowed to use a very upscale church in the area. One of the chaplains I was working with invited me to use his church. And there in the midst of this huge audience were 8 people looking for the pastor of their church in a small town called Port Barre, Louisiana, which is north of Lafayette and just east of Opelousas. Lafayette's a big city, 100,000, 120,000 people. Opelousas is something like 20,000. Port Barre is about 5,000. Isn't that something? That the small town the church is in is just outside of a larger town, just outside of a major town. And as we met, and as they decided that I should be their pastor, I was still on orders, and it was odd because they didn't expect to find somebody so quick. The house, the parsonage that they provided, was still being remodeled, it's still under construction. And as we arrived and met the people, and I started coming in on Sundays to begin preaching. We weren't living there yet. I was still on orders with the National Guard and going back and forth from hurricane disaster areas to the small town to preach on Sundays, and then I would leave. Sometimes we would come in on Saturday night, and we'd stay with friends or church members. They were very gracious, they were very kind. They showed us the house. There was a big open area in the main part of the house. It was kind of an open floor plan where the kitchen and the dining room and the living room made this kind of L shaped. There was a big hole in the living room floor where they were redoing the plywood, the subfloor. And because the floor had to be taken up, they invited us to pick out our own flooring. They let us sand the cabinets and restain them in a color that we wanted. And then my neighbor was my one deacon. His name's Mr. Gene. He bought us a stove for the kitchen because there wasn't one. They had replaced the water heater. They were painting the walls. Nobody in the church anticipated them finding a pastor so quickly, but they were absolutely sure, and I was absolutely sure, that we were the right fit, and I was going to pastor that church, and it was going to be my first pastorate. But wait, there's more. The church is the premier Southern Baptist church in this small town. It's right across the street from the high school, and it's a sweet little brick chapel with a metal building in the parking lot that they use as a fellowship hall to have meals together and have events. And they actually were part of Second Harvest, which provided a box of food to the needy people of the area. And that metal building became the hub of distribution for this. And so everybody knew about this church. The parsonage was, or the church I should say, was on the main road. The parsonage was down the side road along the bayou, and then you had to turn again and go further north right up to the edge of the city limit sign. The next lot over was open, so there was a big grassy field to the side of the house and a cow pasture behind the house. Lots of big open space. There was a yard. There were trees. There was bushes. The city limit sign was halfway through the next lot. It was a dead-end street. The house was a 4-bedroom house, which is interesting because we wound up adopting my nephew and needed an extra bedroom, and we also hosted church members and other people that were in need and needed a place to sleep. They needed a place to live, and we housed people periodically. So that was the 4th bedroom. The back bedroom was my home office. I had bookcases and a big table in there where I would talk to people and counsel people, and I kept my books and my library back there. It was all so perfect. There was not a garage. It was a carport, and part of the carport there was a storage building, and then what we would call a breezeway to the backyard. It was everything I had asked for. But wait, there's more. The color of the house, as you can imagine by now, was yellow, and the shutters were maroon. God answered my desire, my wish, my prayer, down to the color of the shutters. My mind still wanders, and my mind still is baffled at the way God met every request, all based out of my imagination, because God is able to do more than we can think or imagine. Within the church, there was a retired pastor, a great man of God named Merrick Henry. He and his wife became mentors for me and my wife. He helped me through the first years of the pastorate. Always referred to me as pastor. Never talked down to me. Was always very encouraging. And he pastored a church in another town. He was not a former pastor of that church. He had his own church, but he had lots and lots of experience. He and I have a very similar theology. We would sit and have long conversations about what we believed, and that just bolstered me up and supported me more than I can even explain. I will always be grateful to Merrick and Karen. It was a good first experience. I learned a lot. It was more than I could have ever thought or imagined. It was. I will forever be grateful to the people of the church and the town of Port Barre, Louisiana, for giving me an opportunity and inviting me to be their pastor for my first church. I will forever be grateful to God for the opportunity, for the rich and abundant blessings that He afforded, and how He met every request I have. What are your requests? What do you wish the Lord? Commit it to prayer. Seek His face. Know His name. God is able to do more than we can think or even imagine. Trust that and be blessed today. Thanks for watching.